Since childhood, I had a dream of living in a big bungalow. That dream finally came true when my husband was offered a spacious bungalow to rent by his office. It wasn't just a bungalow, it was a grand mansion with 5 rooms. At the center of the house was an open courtyard, reminiscent of the old-style mansions. Outside, there was a vast garden with an ancient peepal tree. When I looked at that tree, I felt an unsettling dread wash over me and couldn't help but stare at it for a while. Suddenly, I felt as if someone had given me a gentle shove, but I brushed it off and went inside the house. The kids were ecstatic. For them, this enormous house was like a dream come true. They were darting between rooms, when suddenly, I heard my younger son Rishabh scream. My husband and I, who were in the back room unpacking, rushed out to the courtyard and found Rishabh groaning in pain. I started scolding him, and he cried, "It wasn't my fault. Someone pushed me, and I twisted my ankle." Hearing his words sent chills down my spine because I had felt that very same push on the roof earlier. I scanned the courtyard, but nothing seemed amiss. Just then, pigeon droppings landed on me. I looked up in surprise and was shocked to see that the peepal tree from the garden loomed prominently over the courtyard, with its branches visibly streaming in the wind. I don't know why, but every time I looked at that tree, my skin would crawl. That night, I shared my fears with my husband. At first, he chuckled, but then he became serious and said, "Look, it was because of your insistence that I agreed to such a large bungalow. So put that delusion out of your mind and live your dream freely. You may not have another chance to live in such a house again." He was indeed right. I thought to myself that maybe I was overthinking. The next day, I dove into cleaning the house. Surprisingly, despite offering more money, I couldn't find a maid to help. I had to handle all the household chores by myself. After sweeping for a while, I was exhausted and was resting on a stool when my gaze fell on a small locked door. It had a large padlock. I don't know why, but I felt a strong urge to enter that room. I remembered that the person who helped us get this house had given us an old set of keys. I quickly found the key set and unlocked that room. The sight inside was quite eerie. There was no light in the room, but since it was daytime, ample light streamed in through the 2 large skylights. I looked around. There were cobwebs in several places, and dust covered everything. It seemed as though centuries had passed since this room was cleaned. Coughing, I stepped inside slowly. The room was cluttered with old junk. However, upon closer inspection of those items, I was taken aback. That chest, chair, table. The pots looked quite ancient, and the intricate carvings on them seemed to date back to the 16th or 17th century, from the era of some kings or emperors. Suddenly, my eye caught a strangely shaped dressing table. Its mirror was half broken, but my full reflection was still visible. I found myself instinctively drawn towards it. As I approached and tried to open it, it started to shake. I let out a scream, but it felt as if no sound came out. Before I could react, the dressing table toppled over onto me. I struggled to lift it and free myself, but it felt as if someone was adding extra pressure on top of it. Just as I started to lose consciousness, I felt someone grab my hand and pull me away. When I came to, I was lying in bed, and my husband, kids, and the doctor were standing nearby. I was confused about what had happened, staring at them in disbelief. Then my older son Ronak spoke up, "Mom, you were unconscious in that room. I pulled you out." My husband shouted at me, "If that table had fallen just a bit more, it could have broken your spine. You take things too far, Manju. Is cleaning really that important to you?" Then the doctor said, "Thank goodness I didn't get seriously hurt. I have a slight fracture in my hand, but it will heal." That night, I recounted everything to my husband. "I've started to feel scared in this house," I said. "It's all just in your head. There's nothing to worry about." "Just go to sleep, everything will be fine," he replied affectionately. My husband brought home the sister of the office peon. "Manju will help you with your chores. She'll stay here, so you won't have to commute every day." I showed her to her room and explained the tasks for the day before going back to my own room. "Thank you for being so caring," I said as I hugged my husband. Just then, I noticed a shadow outside the window. I rushed over, pulled the curtain back, but there was nothing there. It must have been just my imagination. With that thought, I reassured myself. A few days passed relatively peacefully. Then one day, our maid was hanging clothes on a wire in the courtyard when suddenly, I heard her scream. Running towards the sound, I found her on the floor, and the iron rods we use for hanging the wires had fallen too. "Lotta, how did this happen? These sticks are really strong. How did they fall on you?" I asked in surprise. Then, I somehow lifted him and brought him to the bed, and called my husband at the office to tell him. "Madam, believe me, it's not my fault. I was just peacefully drying the clothes when I glanced up at the peepal tree above. I was merely observing it when it suddenly fell on me," she said, moaning in pain. I felt a shiver run through my forehead. Whenever any of us has been hurt, the shadow of the peepal tree has always been present. That day, the shadow of the peepal tree was clearly visible in that room as well. My body quivered. Could a demon be dwelling in this tree? Someone who doesn't want us to stay here, and thus tries to hurt us to drive us away? Now I began to live in constant fear. At the slightest noise, my spirit would tremble. I shared my fears and all the incidents related to the peepal tree with my husband. Could you please power on the speaker? Let's take a moment to think." My husband said reassuringly. Days went by, and I found myself doing all the work again because Lotta had sustained a serious injury and had gone back to the village. One day, my husband brought a man along with him. Pointing to the peepal tree, he said, "This is the tree. Trim it as much as you can." Upon hearing this, I rushed over. "What are you doing? Does anyone actually chop down a peepal tree?" I said angrily. "Manju, this is just old-fashioned thinking. Regardless of the tree, trimming it is necessary. Besides, trimming it means its shade won't reach every corner of the house. You'll also be able to live peacefully. Come on, brother, hurry up," they said. As the man approached the peepal tree, strong winds began to blow. In no time, those winds intensified into a storm. Suddenly, a massive branch fell from the tree, creating a deafening roar. I shut my eyes tightly. When I opened them 2 minutes later, everything was eerily quiet. As I stepped forward, I was horrified by what I saw. My husband was on the ground, and that enormous branch had struck him. He was screaming in pain. In a panic, I shouted for Ronak. With his help, we managed to lift the branch and get him inside. When the doctor arrived, we called for an ambulance and rushed to the hospital. My husband had a fracture in his lower back. I was left stunned upon hearing this. How many more lives will that peepal tree's curse ruin? Whether anyone chooses to believe it or not, I am certain. It had become clear that someone in this house did not want us to stay here. At that moment, I didn't think it was right to tell my husband about this, but I had made up my mind that once he recovered, we would leave this house. I was visiting the hospital every day. One day, I ended up being a little late. When I saw the front door open, I felt a surge of panic. I rushed inside, and what I saw was nothing less than a nightmare. In the courtyard, my youngest son stood frozen with fear, staring up at the peepal tree. He was so terrified that he couldn't make a sound. When I looked up, my heart dropped. My elder son was hanging from the tree. In shock, I let out a scream. Ronak, hearing my scream, panicked and slipped. I quickly positioned a nearby cot beneath him, and he fell onto it with a thud. I picked him up and carried him into the room. His back was severely red. I applied a hot compress on his back and made him drink turmeric milk before putting him to sleep. Now my conviction had strengthened even more. When Ronak woke up in the morning, he told me that he was playing badminton with Rishabh. The shuttlecock got stuck in a tree. When he climbed up to retrieve it, someone gave him a push. But there was nobody there. As he began to fall, he suddenly grabbed onto a branch. But why did you climb up in the first place? Not applicable. Rishabh and I had a bet. That's all. He wanted to win. But what if something happened to you in your rush to win? I said, pulling him into an embrace. My family can't take this anymore. I'm leaving here tomorrow. I was deep in thought when I spotted a shadow. I stepped outside to check, but there was nobody there. That's when I noticed that shadow by the gate. I ran after it. As soon as I went through the gate, it slammed shut by itself. In a panic, I turned around to see a silhouette entering the house. When I tried to push the gate open and get inside, it wouldn't budge. I struggled hard, but the gate remained locked. I was drenched in sweat because the kids were inside. I didn't know what to do. Just then, I heard Rishabh's voice screaming, "Mom, where are you?" "Mom, I'm scared." "Son, I'm outside. The gate won't open. Be brave. Ronak, hurry up and come here." I yelled. But I felt like my voice wasn't reaching Rishabh or Ronak. I could hear Rishabh calling me repeatedly, but it just wouldn't reach him. I collapsed helplessly against the gate. When I came to my senses in the morning, I tried to open the gate again. This time, it opened easily. I rushed inside to the children's room and saw they were sleeping peacefully. My heart felt relieved. When they woke up, I asked them what had happened during the night. "Mom, nothing happened. We were sleeping soundly and didn't hear you at all." I realized that the monster had done all of this to scare me. I told the kids to get ready. I took them to the hospital and explained everything to my husband. According to the doctor, their plaster was scheduled to come off the next day. I decided I would stay there that night with the kids. The next morning, after the plaster was removed, we all returned home. My resolve was strong. I began to pack our things. Think it over once more, Manju. Maybe it's just your imagination. I don't know anything. It could be an illusion. But the events are pointing towards something else. I can't put my children's lives at risk. What if there really is a monster? No, I've made up my mind. We must return the monster to its home. As we packed, our car drove out of the gate of that house. I turned to look back. The Peepal tree stood silently, its leaves fluttering in the breeze as if it were reveling in its victory. It would remain peaceful until someone else comes to stay there.